Matthew.
Sure, thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Intercity Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks a lot for the briefing. I was following your tweets from PNG and all over the place. It's to Ambassador Kamau. But I wanted to ask, I saw in an interview, Ms. Robinson, that you'd said, I mean, or maybe they'd put these, that the world's mishandling of this. And I just wanted to sort of zero in on this in terms of what lessons can be drawn as the two of you go around and see the impacts and beat the drum for increased funding. What should the UN do going forward? What should the next Secretary General do so that the system is ready for whether it's weather-related or some other slow impact, slow onset crisis? What should be done?
There's no doubt, Matthew, that the next Secretary General has to put front and center the issues that are correlated to these slow onset climatic events, has to put those issues at front and center of his agenda or her agenda. Of this, there is no doubt, because it is at the core of what we want to do around the implementation of the 2030 agenda, but it's also the real imminent danger that is faced by communities today. And she will find these issues unfolding on their watch on January the 1st. And so we cannot have a Secretary General coming on board who doesn't recognize that getting a handle on these emergencies has to be the first thing that they focus on before they then turn to other issues which are equally important, no doubt, but which are not life-threatening in the way in which we have witnessed out there around these particular climatic events. So for me, any Secretary General who comes on board must recognize that the emergency matters, those that can drive and undermine communities and create havoc, undermine democracies out there, undermine peace and security, are things that they will have to prioritize. And in this case, the El Nino, the La Nina, because by then we will be in the La Nina cycle, are things that they will have to have a very, very intense grip on moving forward.
Just perhaps building briefly on that, because I very much agree with Macharia, there was a tendency when we were approached to emphasize the humanitarian dimension and look at it through a humanitarian lens. That's not good enough. It's very, very important, and we need the funding now for the humanitarian needs on the ground. But actually, the approach we need is an integrated one. And that's why we're going to try and operate at two different levels in the way we exercise our mandate. We are going to plead for the closing of that gap, the support that's needed because people are dying, because children are getting malnourished and are stunted, because the urgency is there. But what we're saying is we need to plan for a more integrated human security approach next time, where all agencies work closely together. And I don't mean just the UN. This has to happen also at the EU level, at the AU level, at the, we've got to get this across. We have time to plan. That's the one thing when we are looking at the aggravated El Nino effects. It'll be somewhere between the next 3 and 7 years. And we would hope to have a more blueprint approach at the international and regional level, and that countries will know that they will support, and that countries will signal immediately. In some cases, countries have been slow to admit how bad the problem is once it crept up, because they don't want to admit they have that kind of problem. But actually, it's really important that countries do signal and know that it's right for them to signal as early as possible so that we can have a more effective way of managing it.
And if I may, Matthew, the other issue that I think the Secretary General will have to face up to is how fit for purpose is the United Nations for the new normal that we're now speaking of? How is the United Nations set up to respond? And by the United Nations, I mean not just the Secretariat entities, but the funds and programs, the agencies and organizations, and how they respond to this new normal moving forward. This is going to be a major issue that I think the Secretary General will have to come to grips with very, very quickly. Thank you.
One follow.
We'll just come back to you in a minute,
Okay.
if
All
we
right.
may. Matthew, follow up.
Sure. It really was a follow-up. It had to do with this idea of what the next Secretary General should do. So I wanted, again, and maybe it's also you as a member of the group of the elders. is, do you think that the Security Council being ultimately in charge of these behind closed doors interviews and of proposing maybe only a single candidate to the GA, will issues like this, which are not, directly, it seems to me, addressed by the Security Council on its agenda, sort of fall by the roadside? And what could be done to make, have the candidates answer on the issue, or what should be the place of issues like this in the selection process? Thanks a lot.
Well, perhaps I could begin by saying the Security Council has, on a number of occasions now, recognised the dangers to human security of climate change. There have been serious debates from a human security perspective. So I would at least hope that this would be part of the consideration and part of the agenda. Again, since you speak to me as an elder, I would just say that the elders take very seriously the need for more reform of the Security Council. And in February last year at the Munich conference, we issued a strong plea for that kind of reform, for less of the use of the veto, obviously, for broadening the membership of the Security Council, which may be hard to do but needs to be done. But in particular, we took the step of saying that we would favour a one-term Secretary General, preferably for 7 years. Now, it's the General Assembly that would change the term of a Secretary General, but I think we know that a Secretary General facing into a second term is weaker and is at the beck and call of whatever the Security Council members want at that stage, and that's not a good situation for the authority and prestige of the Security Council itself and of the UN. So I would encourage you, because the statement of the elders is on the website, theelders.org, and so is our thinking about reform of the United Nations itself.
If I may, thank you for that question, Matthew. There's two things that come to my mind. The first is on Security Council reform. These kind of emergencies and those who are affected by these kind of emergencies only calls more to the issue of how the Security Council is representative of the world's populations, and how the Security Council is able to be sensitive and to prioritize what ought to be the priorities of a Security Council that is sensitive to the dynamics in the world. And these dynamics, as we are saying here, are driven by the new norm. So Security Council reform becomes very important so that the Security Council itself becomes sensitive and more responsive to issues that it might not be so responsive to in the past, by virtue of its configuration. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't think it's lost on Security Council members that you want to have a Secretary General who hits the ground running. It cannot be that we will spend months and maybe a couple of years bringing a new Secretary General up to speed, because either they are not particularly grounded on these issues and these complexities, which is why I said a little earlier that it has to be someone who understands the dynamics of the challenges that are facing development in the context of humanitarian emergencies, in the context of security, in the context of peace and peace building, in the context of development and the implementation of 2030 agenda. I am sure that the Security Council understands and will look for the kind of candidate that can hit the ground running, so that by January 1, this individual will be able to take charge of these issues and move them forward, because we simply have no time to lose.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.